This presentation, titled Food Defense Assessment and Mitigation, An Auditor's Perspective, comes to us from Ray Haddad. Since 2007, Ray has specialized in food safety, food defense, and food fraud prevention. He's worked in quality roles, auditing, training, and consulting with varied organizations, from small family-owned to multinational food businesses, intergovernmental organizations, and regulators in New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. As the principal trainer and managing director at Food Surety Limited, Ray is committed to developing and delivering fully tailored training and advice supporting food professionals to do what is right with confidence so they are successful and fulfilled, protecting consumers everywhere. And with that, take it away, Ray.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for the invite to talk on this Food Safety Expo. It's definitely a pleasure to be part of it, supporting food professionals all around the world, technically, which is brilliant. So yes, Ray Haddad from Food Surety, and today we're going to be talking about food defense mitigation and assessment from an auditor's perspective. So just a quick touch on Food Surety. Like, our purpose is to work with food professionals to support them doing what's right with confidence, so they are more successful and fulfilled, protecting consumers everywhere. And a talk like this today is definitely in line with what we'd like to be doing, so thanks again. Speaking of today's session, the learning outcomes that we are aiming for would be exploring potential attacks and attackers and the different types of these, and the impact of food threats or food defense threats on the industry. We will move into exploring a step-by-step process to develop a food defense plan. This process is developed by Food Surety, and people who started working on one know that there is no set method, which is a bit confusing, really. So what we worked on is a bit of a process, 7 steps that we take people through. Today we will not dive into it in full details on how to build a food defense plan. However, we will talk about how to audit one, and we will touch on it by default anyway, but we will look at it from an auditor point of view, reviewing it. And this is technically the third outcome that we'd like to achieve: understanding the auditor expectation, and of course touching on practical tips for the auditors when they are reviewing a food defense plan, which comes handy for people being audited, of course. So let's start with definition of food defense. To start with, it does vary based on which standard we're talking about and which part of the world even. So the definition that I usually like to go with is the one from Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI. And actually in here, you can see the latest definition from the benchmarking requirements 2020, which has changed slightly from the previous version, by the way. So the definition and the keywords in it are the following. Technically, the process to ensure the security of food ingredients, as well as packaging, from all forms of attacks. And this is a key word there, all forms of attacks. If you're talking about the intentional adulteration rule in America, they usually focus on actual adulteration of the product. However, GFSI take it to in a broader way, if you'd like. And we're talking about intentional malicious attacks, including ideologically motivated attacks that may lead to contamination or unsafe product. And the word contamination is new, by the way, which suggests that it might be an attack that is not necessarily leading to a food safety issue or a public health issue. So interesting, but hey, this is the definition. The types of attacks that we need to consider does vary. And it can be malicious contamination, where someone actually put a poison or a piece of glass or a contaminant in the product intentionally to cause harm to the consumer or the business or the brand. Another type of food defense attack can be extortion, where people threaten to deliver an attack, and that in itself can cause harm, and that's why it is an attack in itself. Cybercrime, definitely, we rely a lot on our computers and our networks these days in the food industry, and if the paperwork is not there, shipments can't move around the world because it doesn't work if there is no traceability. And if a hacker break into a food organization's network and just delete some paperwork, that alone is a big problem. Another type can be espionage, especially with bigger businesses who have unique technologies they have developed, or maybe recipes. Somebody might steal those and cause some harm. Talking about the attackers, there are also different types of attackers with different levels of capabilities and different levels of access and motivation. For example, it can be an activist, it can be a terrorist, it can be a disgruntled individual or employee, it can be the neighbor who is insisting on buying our premise, and that's why they want us out, and they are pushing hard to the point that they start attacking our business to push us out somehow. So as a professional in a food organization, you will understand and know the context of your organization, and you need to think of the potential attacks and the attackers and who is interested, and you start from there technically. Examples of food defense attacks that took place over the years. In USA, for example, years ago, somebody went around to chicken farms and they intentionally put the heating elements really high up in the farms, killing the birds. And they did it in multiple farms. And in this example, you can tell that this person has the know-how. They know about the technicality of doing that and how to operate the machines. And also they know in that particular farm where to find these controls. So there's a bit of know-how. Another example, somebody in UK insisted on adding pieces of glass and things like that to the bread again and again, causing a lot of damage to one major bakery there. It can be somebody like hitting the forklift or ruining it, or even breaking the door of the fridge, or hacking into the network, and many different examples. We tend to think that bad things will happen to other people, but hey, it can happen to us as well, and we better be careful. So probably you've heard of terms like VASP and TASP, and these stands for Vulnerability Assessment and Critical Control Point, and Threat Assessment and Critical Control Point. Both of these sounds like HACCP apparently, and because it is very similar. It's all about thinking what can go wrong, how bad it can be, what can I do about it. HACCP usually focus on the food safety side of things, while VASP focus on the vulnerabilities, the deception that somebody might do intentionally to make more money. TASP, or food defense, is about intentional attacks aimed at causing harm. The focus of each one of these vary, as I just mentioned. The difference between VASP and TASP is the intention. Is it intentional to cause harm, or is it intentional to make more money? And that's the difference. From a scope point of view, when you build your food defense plan, you need to include the whole supply chain with focus on the site. When it comes to the vulnerability assessment for food fraud, again, it is the whole supply chain, but the focus will be more on the supply chain in this case. But as an auditor, again, you need to make sure that the whole supply chain is actually covered, and I will touch on that again later on. The objective is we want safe food, we want to protect people, customers, brands, premises, and so. And by the way, some standards make it very clear that food defense is about protecting the premise, the people, the brand, the supply chain, while other standards or regulatory requirements make it very clear that what they are concerned about is mainly public health and protecting consumers. So whether you're developing a food defense plan or you're an auditor, you need to know exactly which standard you work with. Usually I tend to encourage people to go with what GFSI says, because it's very broad and it covers technically most of the other requirements. Okay, so that takes us to conducting the assessment and building the food defense plan. As I mentioned earlier, there is no set way of doing it. Standards usually talk to you about the outcome that they'd like to achieve, which is protecting public, protecting the supply chain. they don't tell you how to do it, they don't tell you how it should look like. What we did at Food Surety, we developed this little process. We broke it down into 7 steps, and we kept it like very focused. Every step cover one area, so it's easy to follow. As an auditor, don't expect to see this level of details everywhere you go, because some people might go with the very bare minimum, some people might go a lot more comprehensive than this if they have the need to. What we would like to talk about today is the components that should be there, and as an auditor you need to see that somewhere. As long as it's there, you should be fine, and this is what we will dive into toward the end of this presentation. So the process of developing a food defense plan, the first step is assemble a team who know what they're doing. They know the food defense requirements, they know the concept of risk assessment, they know their site, their supply chain, and what can go wrong, or what types of attacks can take place. And from an auditor point of view, you need to see a document explaining who's the team, what competency they have. Usually they will show you some sort of training. If they have not been trained, it's a bit harder, but they still need to convince you and give you objective evidence that they know what they're talking about when it comes to food defense. Maybe they have read many articles, they've been to many webinars, maybe they've done internal training and assessment, and so on. So the next step is list and group and map the supply chain of ingredients. It's important to mention that this is not necessarily mandatory. However, many standards, for example BRC, clearly says that received ingredients has to be assessed for potential threats. And if I'm assessing potential threats of ingredients, by default I need to know where they came from and how they have been delivered, because the attacks will potentially happen during that time. So, and by the way, you have to do that for your food fraud prevention anyway. So while it's there anyway, why not make a reference to it to your food defense plan as well? And that's the idea there. Again, putting the auditor hat on, you need to see that they have assessed threats from the supply chain somehow. Step number 3, list and describe production steps that take place at the workplace or the organization. The easiest way around it is your flowchart from the HACCP plan. Every organization who have a food safety management system, you would expect them to be following the HACCP principles, and it's very likely that they have, if they use HACCP apparently, they have the flow charts there describing the processes, and that can be a very good start to understand the process, then start thinking what can go wrong, what attacks can take place at every step. So that's there, that's documented. I recommend people to just have a reference to their flowchart in the HACCP section, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel technically. Step number 4 is identifying and describing the broad mitigation strategies. Think of these like PRPs, prerequisite programs, or good manufacturing practices, GMPs, when it comes to food safety. These are generic controls that we apply at the site to make sure that we're not that vulnerable to threats, like food defense threats. Examples of these can be site map and security. You would like to see that the site have some sort of access control, potentially they have fence, potentially they have CCTV cameras, maybe they do have, I don't know, like guards who like visit the site at night after hours, maybe they have lights at night, all of these things that help securing the site. Every site is different, every site have different levels of controls, but we need to see these in place at least, and it does vary on what is needed. Another example of broad mitigation would be logistics and storage security, maybe locking the storage areas, maybe only authorized people are allowed in certain parts of the storage area, and so personnel control, maybe they do screening when they hire people, maybe they trust their team, majority of them work there for quite some time, Some people will say, hey, at our site in the production area, at least there will be 5 people at any given minute, which is a control in itself. So they need to view it as a control when it comes to food defense and write it down. And the list can be very long, of course. Network and computers, again, maybe we need to talk to our IT departments or contractors just to see what types of controls, what types of protection we do have to protect our network and so. These need to be listed. As an auditor, you need to see that they do have controls somewhere. They have thought of them as controls. They've written them down. Good. Now we're moving into step number 5, which is gathering information around what can go wrong, around the potential threats, and also conducting an assessment. So this is the part that will take most amount of time, and this is the part that usually is confusing for some people. So what we need to consider here would be these 4 questions. The first one is, who might want to attack us? The organization need to think, is it a disgruntled individual? Is it the neighbor who want to buy our property? Is it somebody who doesn't like our customer? Also. They list potential attackers and what they might do. How might they do it? Question number 2. Then they move into thinking, where are we vulnerable? So like a real life example, I was working with a client and they mentioned that they do have well, their site is close to a stadium where soccer games take place, and sometimes people lose and when they lose they're not happy and they might cause trouble when they leave the stadium. And it's not that it happens a lot, but it's something that can happen. And they know that they have a power generator that is exposed. You can see it from the main road, and they thought somebody might jump on the wall and cause damage to that. And that's why they decided to add an extra fence and things like that to protect that piece of equipment. So they thought who might do it, why they might be motivated. It has nothing to do with them, but hey, this is the scenario they find themselves in, and that's why they decided to add controls, which is question number 4. What can we do about it? Good. So how the site should gather information does vary. What I suggest to people is to use an Excel sheet. Actually, this is a template that we provide to people. It's a whole Excel workbook where they can populate all the information coming through each step of the process. Probably you can see here that they need to write down what type of attack, the who and the what. They need to write down how motivated is that attacker. Is it high, is it low, motivation, why, the capacity, how much access they have to that piece of equipment or process step or product that they might think of attacking, the controls that we have today, and how bad it can be from a health point of view and from an economy point of view if they succeed delivering that attack. After you collect all the information from the supply chain as well as the process steps that you have at your workplace, you move into conducting an assessment. By the way, as an auditor, you need objective evidence that they have conducted some sort of an assessment. How? It's up to them. It has to be done, it has to be documented. This is an example I suggest to people to use a simple risk matrix. In reality, it's up to them how they do it. As long as they have done it, it's documented, the auditor should be happy, if that makes sense. Good. Putting an auditor hat on, what I'll be looking for in this scenario would be, have they documented it? Have they considered the supply chain threats? Are they being thorough enough? Is there an obvious threat that they are not considering at all? Have they conducted the assessment? Is it documented? The purpose of this step is to identify the very significant threats, so they take them to the next step and they start applying extra controls. And that is step number 7, which is the food defense plan. So they write down the existing controls that they have today, and they might need to add extra controls around the very significant threats. They write it down. Any control they identify, they need to say or have a clear procedure around who's going to do it, who's monitoring it, verifying it, what corrective action should take place. And this is how we do things usually in any food safety management system. And we need to see all of that documented and implemented. An example, as an auditor, what I might be looking for if they said, hey, we conduct audits on our suppliers, and part of that is checking what food defense measures they have. Great. I will be saying, okay, show me your audit procedures. Yeah, brilliant. Show me the checklist that your auditor go and audit the supplier with, and I need to see a question or two talking about food defense. But if there's nothing in it talking food defense, then, well, you talk about a control that doesn't exist, which is a problem. All right. So from an auditor point of view, as I said, you need to make sure that they are being thorough and the rest of it. Your role is not to confirm that, yes, they are protecting their business, because we can't. I'm an auditor. My role is to say or to assess that they have followed the procedure and they meet the standards expectation around the process followed, not that they are 100% protected against attacks. Does that make sense? So the last little topic to share with you is the guidelines from FSSC 22000. This is a list of the things that they expect the auditor to assess. This is what they want their auditors to assess. I kind of covered it, but let's go through it again to make sure that we are good with it. So they want to make sure that their team competencies and knowledge is there and documented. And we spoke about that. Show me who's in the team and is it all documented? Do they have competency? Can they demonstrate that? The next part is threat assessment performed and documented. In the example I shared with you, there was a simple risk matrix to assess the threats. They can do it differently. There is the FDA plan builder, food defense plan builder. There is the cover and shock if they'd like to go that far. Many other ways, as long as they do that and document it. All relevant threats are covered. Yeah, so if you go somewhere and it's obvious that somebody is like not happy with them, but when you look at their food defense plan, it's not mentioned at all, well, apparently you're missing an obvious threat, so that's not good enough. Another example would be, what is the extent of the threat assessment? And these are the wording of FSSC 22000. They say, has the whole supply chain been assessed? They want you or the organization to assess the whole supply chain. It's very clearly stated there. Have the significant threats been identified based on the assessment? If yes, have they put controls for them? In the food defense plan, is it documented the way we mentioned? Another point would be, how are training and communication addressed? They need to train the people on the site on the types of controls that they take care of. So for example, in the paper, we might say in our broad mitigation that everybody is trained to ask strangers why you're here. How can I help you if you see a stranger in the production area? But have they actually communicated that to the team? Have they trained them to do that? BRC GS, in their standard, they will say everybody on site has to have some sort of an awareness around food defense. Not how to build the plan, but some sort of awareness, a bit of an induction or something like that. So again, you need to be aware of the standard you're working with and their expectation. Next question is there a verification system in place? Internal audit, SQF standard, for example, expect a challenge of the food defense plan, not only verifying it regularly, but even challenging it, which is a form of verification, but it's specifically asked for. Is the analysis regularly reviewed? And it has to be. Whenever there is a need, if we've been attacked or there's a threat or something has changed in the area or the neighbors or something like that, maybe we need to review our food defense plan, or at least annually. This is what most standards ask for. And emergency preparedness. By default, bigger businesses, they need to have an emergency preparedness plan, and part of it should cover food defense. If we are being attacked, how we will manage this, and clear procedures in place. And the last point to mention is the food safety management system has to support all of this that we have spoken about. So if we say we do internal audit, if we say we train people, so your food safety management system should have procedures in place supporting all of that, and from a monitoring point of view, verification, corrective action, and the rest. So this is what an auditor should look for, and if you are being audited, then this is what they will look for, and you need to be prepared, if that makes sense. And actually, yeah, like I thought I will mention this to you here. In Food Surety website, we have a food defense plan checklist. It's available actually for free, and it has 27 questions in it. So that's a real good guide on how to audit a food defense plan if you're interested. And by now we can say, yep, we covered food defense. We explored examples around attacks, the attackers, and what impact they might have. By the way, just to make it very clear, the impact can be financial, can be affecting consumer confidence, can be affecting the health, public health, of course. So it's not good. It's less likely to happen. However, if it happens, it's really bad. So we better look into it. We looked at the process of developing a food defense plan and what the auditor should look for, and what objective evidence you should see when you audit a food defense plan, and that was the third outcome technically, which is the expectation from an auditor point of view. So thank you so much, and if you have questions you can reach us through Exemplar Global or through our social media and website and the rest of it. And I hope like you found this session useful, and I'm sure you would have picked up some good tips. And thanks again, Mike, for having me today. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much, and I will pass the ball back to Mike.
Well, thank you, Ray Haddad, for that auditor's perspective, for your auditor's perspective on food defense.